Hello everyone, Tom Simmons coming to you today from Dungeon Dragon Farm in Chester, Vermont, and this is my homestead. And the topic of today's management lesson is departmentalization. Now for most small businesses, departmentalization is not something that is forefront in their minds. I mean, there's two of us who live here on this small farm, and we take care of every aspect of the operation. The poultry, the vegetables, the fruit trees, the cider making, the maple syrup, the mushrooms, in the future honey, and walnut wood stain, which is made from the nuts that fall from the tree that we're sitting under here. And for most small businesses, there tends to be a few people, maybe 2 to 5 or 6, who are pretty much running around doing everything and have their hand in every pot, so to speak. But as you begin to grow, and I want you to imagine what happens if this small farm becomes a major commercial operation over time. As you start to grow, you find yourself needing to add additional people to handle the workload. Whether it's an additional person working the gardens, or perhaps you'll need someone to handle all the money issues, the finances, the accounts payable, the payroll, the taxes, the W-2 forms, all that stuff. And most small businesses do operate that way. They begin to grow, they see a need for an additional person, and so they hire a person for that position. But if your business, whether it's new and growing or whether it's already large, is seeking to get even larger and expand even more, then departmentalization, or how you organize the interior of your business, becomes very important. Because once you start making major changes as to who is doing what and who is answering to who, one of the things you can impact, as we discussed in an earlier video, is the internal climate of your organization, the organizational culture. Because when major shifts happen, employees begin to wonder, well, who am I going to answer to now? Who's going to be my boss now? Am I going to have to do more work than I'm doing now? Am I going to have to do something entirely different than I'm doing now? And that creates nervousness, it creates anxiety, it creates conflict. So if you can think about departmentalization before you have to actually engage in it, it will help you pave the way for that happening. Now there are 5, perhaps 6 different major ways that corporations departmentalize. And I just want to give a brief review of each of these to give you an idea of the different models you can look at in designing the management structure and the organizational structure of that corporation. The first is the most common, and it's called functional departmentalization. And what that means is you are basically dividing your company internally by the function that people engage in. So I will use our farm, and again assume it's a much larger farm than it is, as the example for each of these to give you an idea of how they look differently. In functional organization, we would have one group of people whose job it was to prepare the raised beds, to grow the crops, to process the crops, to create the products that we're creating. We would have a whole different set of people who might be handling financing, who would be doing the payroll and the accounts receivable and accounts payable. And they might be in an office on-site or off-site. We might have a sales force that goes out to all the different potential customers and tries to market what it is we're growing. But everyone has a very specialized job, and that's called functional departmentalization. Now the strength to functional departmentalization is that you get very specific skill sets and people become very good at exactly what they're doing, and they really don't have to know about the other operations. The person who is preparing the beds and planting the turnips doesn't have to know about the tax implications of hiring another person or not. Everyone does their specific job. Of course, the downfall of that is really the same thing. is that you've got very specialized people who cannot fill in another department or another branch of the organization if needed, because they don't understand that operation. That's simply not their operation. This is probably the most traditional form that American businesses have used as they've grown, functional departmentalization. But it's not the only form that you can use within your organization. For example, a second form of departmentalization is called product departmentalization, where your organization is creating divisions within the company based on the products that you are selling. An example of that: we produce walnut wood stain from these walnut trees. Now, if you think about it, that's not an edible product. That's something that woodworkers are going to use. It's something that home improvement people are going to use. And there's a whole different mindset and approach and clientele there. So we might have some people in the company devoted to nothing other than the wood stain production from start to finish. And they know that operation. And we might have a different group of people who are devoted to a maple syrup operation or a mushroom growing operation. So we're dividing the company based on the product line. And once again, you get a very specific skill set. People who know how to make maple syrup, how to tap the trees, how to boil it down, how to filter it and package it, have a very different skill set than those who are inoculating logs with mushroom spawn and trying to grow them. And each group knows what its job is, and they have a good sense of their operation. You can have some of the same issues with product differentiation as you have with functional differentiation. Each employee knows their particular job very well, and they may know what goes before their particular job and what comes after within that product line. But it's very hard to actually use them in a different product line. And in fact, the downfall often is that you end up with more employees than you actually need because you are duplicating operations. If this was a very, very large operation, you might actually have finance people in both the walnut stain line and the maple syrup line, when in reality you might be able to combine those. But because you've divided your company by product lines, you have multiple accountants, you have multiple attorneys perhaps, you have multiple sales forces based on the product line. Now, a third way to departmentalize, and this is closely related to product but not always, is to divide your company by your end customer, your end user. Again, using this farm as an example, some of my customers might be restaurants. And restaurants are going to be very interested, let's say, in fresh mushrooms, in fresh vegetables, in fresh eggs. And they're looking at the quality of the particular product and the regularity with which that product can be delivered to them so they can put items on their menu. And that customer is a very different customer than, let's say, a major commercial maple syrup producer who is looking to buy hundreds or thousands of gallons of sap from 100 different small producers. That sap can be a little variable. It doesn't have to show up at a chef's door looking pretty. It can be in large 55-gallon drums, because they're going to take all of the sap from all of these producers and put it into one huge operation anyway. So my commercial client, my commercial food processing client, may be a very different customer than the local restaurant down the road who's looking to buy a few pounds of mushrooms on a regular basis to keep on the menu. So that's another way I can divide my company. And those who know the chefs, who know the restaurants, who know what they're looking for, who have spoken to these people, can come back and within their division let the people who are growing the mushrooms or the vegetables, know precisely what those chefs are looking for, and you get a very good customer service element out of dividing your company that way. One of the drawbacks to that is that very often, whether you want it to exist or not, there is competition within your company between, oh, well, our department did great, and I heard they're having big problems over in that other department. And the employees might try too hard to please the customer to the detriment of the company. Now, a fourth way to divide your company, and this is largely for enormous corporations, is geographically. If you are nationwide, if you are worldwide, it's a very good possibility that you are going to have a vice president for European operations, and a vice president for North American operations, and a vice president for Asian operations. And then underneath them, you're going to have a whole set of manufacturing staff and accounting staff and advertising staff, because advertising in Iowa, quite frankly, is going to take a very different shape than advertising in France. So you have geographically specific personnel for your large operation, but once again, you're duplicating employees because you have to. Once you get that large, your advertising staff for France needs to understand what makes French customers different than Iowan customers. And the fifth way that organizations will departmentalize is actually, to be honest, one of my favorites, and it's called the matrix. Matrix organization is somewhat new. It's one of the newest forms of business organization. And a matrix organization combines any of the previous forms of organization I've discussed with something new. And here's what I mean by that. Let's suppose that one of the operations I decide to go into is consulting with other farms, with other growers who want to do what I'm doing. Now, some people may see that as competition and say, well, you know, good luck. Others may see that as a business opportunity and say, yes, I'd like to help you out, and I'll serve, my company will serve as a consultant for you as you get your operation up and running. Now, in a matrix operation, what would happen is I would take one person out of my vegetable operation, and one person out of my mushroom operation, and one person out of my poultry operation, and one person out of my maple operation, and I would send them as a team under a single leader to work as the consultant team with that new farm. That's got a lot of advantages for me. First of all, I don't have to hire anyone new. Secondly, I can pull people who already have intimate knowledge about their specific aspect of my operation so that they can work together to help this new company get up and running. And when the project is done, it's over and they come back to their regular spots within my organization. The downside to that, of course, is that I am losing some employees to this new consultant operation, although in most cases they're going to be doing both jobs. They're going to actually be doing their regular job on my farm, plus taking some time to help the new operation with the consulting deal. And that means for the employee, it actually can become very stressful because it's more work on their plate. They're doing more. They're responsible for their regular work here on the farm, and they're responsible for providing assistance to the person who hired us to consult. And that also means they're answering to two different bosses, two different supervisors. Because they got their, let's say, their vegetable supervisor here at my farm that they're responsible to, but they're also responsible to the team leader who's heading up the consulting operation. Now, just to take this out of the farm operation, in case you're getting tired of hearing about farming. For major developers, people who work, companies that work with supermarket developers, large housing complex developers, this is a very common way for them to set up their company. Because if I'm a supermarket and I would like to open up a new shopping center, I'll be the anchor store and there'll be a whole bunch of other stores, and there's a lot of land to be purchased and paved and built on, and there's a river behind it, so there are environmental issues, and there are going to be some complaints from the neighbors about the traffic and all that. What most development companies will do is create a matrix. They will create a team for this particular project. So they'll bring one of their traffic experts who will handle the traffic counts and analyzing the traffic flow and the turns in and out of the place. They will bring in a landscape architect. They will bring in someone who is on their environmental team to mitigate or reduce the impacts on the river or the wetland that happens to be behind the operation. And the team will work on the project together. And one of the other advantages that I haven't mentioned yet is that the member of the traffic control team, let's say, actually learns a lot about the environmental impact issues from the person from that department, because they have to work together as to where the best siting of a driveway should be, for instance. And you get a lot of cross-training that way. So there are your 5 biggies: functional, product, customer, geographic, and matrix. There is a 6th form, and that's called the modular form. And this is one that a lot of new companies will use when they're first starting to grow big. And that is, they don't try and do everything themselves. They don't hire people. I'm getting bigger and I can't handle the accounting anymore and the bills and all that. So instead of hiring someone to do that work, I hire an outside company, ADP or Paychecks. They will handle all my payroll, they'll cut the paychecks every week, they'll send the taxes out, and I don't have to worry about it. Strength of that is that I'm not hiring someone, I'm just paying a flat fee. It's usually much more cost effective. And I'm not doing it myself, which is not cost effective for me to be doing, or time effective. And if I grow so big that I need to bring it in-house, I can just end my contract with that outside company. Downside, I've pretty much lost control of that operation. And if an employee says to me, could I get my paycheck a day or two early because I'm going on vacation? I might not be able to do it because I'm not doing it. It's being done by an outside company. So, there you have, let's say, 6 different forms of organization. And as I said, it's not something most businesses think about because they're small and they're growing one person at a time. And they just keep cobbling together new employees to get done what needs to be done. But if you can think about this ahead of time as to what will work best in your operation for the peculiars of your business and your operation, whatever that form that takes, if you think ahead of time, you can avoid disruption to the employees and to the operation and to the internal organizational culture by having it thought through ahead of time. So, hopefully that gives you an idea of the different ways you can organize that business, and as a manager, those are the kind of things you need to be on top of before you need to make that decision and execute it. Tom Simmons, signing off.